Thank you very much. So now we move on to item 14, and that's come from Social Community Development and Housing Committee, the Hagley Park Reference Group. So I'll hand over to Phil Clearwater.
Look, I'm happy, councillors, I'm happy to move this. I think that, in effect, the reference group who've been formed, it's taken some time to form. This is what they have agreed on too. The recommendations originally came from the committee, and now really they're asking for council to be signed off. So in effect, this reference group is being worked in collaboration with council, and I think that's a very good way for this group to work in the future. Clearly being proactive rather than addressing issues with hindsight and trying to patch them up afterwards. So I want to thank staff for a large amount of work that's been done with a lot of the different groups and how well this has been pulled together, and I commend the staff recommendations to you.
Okay, moved by Phil Clearwater and seconded by Dion Swiggs. Sarah, I've got a question too, and Yanni.
Thank you. Just a quick one. Just with the composition of the group, I'm just wondering if any consideration was given to the actual residents groups themselves that surround Hagley Park. So like ICON and those kind of things who've taken part as reference group members for things like the spatial plan for the gardens.
Andrew, is this your report? Yeah, come up to the table, and I think that question's probably best directed straight to staff. Yep, thank you.
Sorry, do you mind repeating the question?
I'm just wondering if you know, the residents groups like ICON who were involved in, say, the Botanic Gardens spatial plan were considered to be suitable for representation in the group.
There is reference in the terms of reference to local groups.
Yeah.
Not essentially to sit on the group, but to be invited in to advise if there was a matter specific to having an impact on the neighbourhood, as opposed to some of the things that this group has been set up to establish.
Yeah.
You know, they're kind of BAU items where people need to go through a decision process, and the group gets the opportunity to assist that.
Yeah.
Whereas,
so how is that different to the Youth Council or Age Concern or say Sport Canterbury? I mean, Sport Canterbury on there, but many of the things that happen at Hagley Park are not to do with sports, but they're on there.
I wasn't actually present at the first group. Phil, do you recall discussion around who should be considered?
Look, I can, and I think one of the things is that clearly a group has to be workable. There are limits to the numbers who might come. They could be invited in the future. I think in relation to the Botanic Gardens aspect, that in fact is not included, it is separate, so this is about Hagley Park. So there was a lot of consideration given to the makeup of the group, and the group are also happy with how this is, certainly because neighbourhood groups could certainly be welcome to come along to make their point of view.
Yeah, I'm just making sure that that it was maybe considered that the neighbourhood groups be invited at the time, and
it was considered.
So there
I
was
there right from the beginning, and it was considered very carefully.
And the recommendation of the committee is not to include residents groups,
but to bring them in for specific items as required.
Yeah. So as long as the groups are aware that they can. That the group exists, and that if they have concerns, they could maybe address them to the group. So letting those neighbourhood groups know that this group now exists and that they might be invited at some stage in the future.
I'm sure that through the committee boards they should be advised, and that's very important.
Yeah, I suppose that was partly my question is in relation to, you know, how this would be, you know, sort of get a front facing, you know, so, you know, they're going to have a page on the council web page, and, you know, with just an update on the meetings that they're holding and advice that they're giving, you know. I mean, because if it's going to be, you know, an opportunity to create, you know, goodwill around the, you know, the collective benefit that their wisdom will bring to these issues, then it seems to me that it should be front facing. And I just wondered whether, are we actually formally establishing the group ourselves? I mean, is that what we're doing? Because I just wonder whether we should receive the information report, and that we should agree to establish the Hagley Park Reference Group. I mean, you could even take the wording out of Purpose 1 as a sounding board for community views and preferences in relation to Hagley Park, and adopt the terms of reference as attached. You know, like it's...
You know, I think as long as it's workable, my recollection is that, in fact, by way of a council decision, the group was already established, so now it is really signing off the terms of reference. But I stand to be corrected.
Normally we have the reference to the decision when it was established. That's not in front of us. So
yeah.
Are you saying that there's a prior resolution that I'm not aware of?
My recollection is that there was there's been a number of resolutions calling for the group by council to be established.
Calling for the group. I'm just wondering if it's actually been formally established.
Look,
because
I'm happy
the way I read this was Council's Legal Services Unit have advised that for the group to take effect, terms of reference will need to be adopted by the council. So I just wonder whether we should just confirm the establishment of the Hagley Park Reference Group.
I'm entirely
and
happy with
adopt the terms of reference.
Absolutely.
And that way we've got an actual clean record of the decision that we've made.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So just those words will do. Confirm the establishment of the Hagley Park Reference Group and adopt the terms of reference as attached. And so when we do a record of this, I mean, I think their terms of reference should be published as well, so that they're here for the public to look at, but who wants to go through a bunch of council agendas looking for it? Yeah. Yanni, and then Dion, then Andrew.
So I do need to move an amendment in regards to the community board. The name's wrong, so it needs to be the Linwood Central Heathcote Community Board. But also, just picking up on...
That's not an amendment, that's just a typo, so we'll just fix that.
Okay, you can just fix it? Okay, because it was raised at the committee, but it hadn't been fixed, so I'll leave it in your capable hands. And then just picking on the point that Sarah made, actually, I actually do think it's a bit of a gap not having the local residents association. We have a residents group policy, and it actually does used to have, I don't know where it's got to, we're reviewing it, but local residents groups are supposed to be contacted about local works in their area, and given the history of that particular residents group and others along Hagley Park, I can see the disadvantage of not having them there, but I can't see the advantage of, I can't see the disadvantage, I'll try and put that more eloquently. Basically, I can see an advantage to having them on this group and a huge disadvantage not having them on the group. And so if the idea is to work together... Which
particular one?
Well, Icon's the one that comes to mind, but there also might be... I mean, I know there's Victoria Neighbourhood Association.
Sorry, remind me what Icon stands for.
That's the Inner City West Neighbourhood Group.
Inner City West Neighbourhood Group. How does that be Icon?
Sorry?
How's that Icon?
Well, it is.
Icon. It
just is what it is.
There's a long history of that group being civic participation around.
It's not an acronym. Around
things through the area. I mean, they've gone to the Environment Court under previous iterations of our district plan. They've been very active in terms of things like the museum redevelopment previously. So I just personally do think it's a really good point that Sarah made. And when you look at some of the other people that are on this group, I mean, some may have...
we're not giving speeches, we're asking questions. Is there any problem?
So the question is
there a problem
what is
with
the harm in
adding
having
Icon?
the group there?
Inner City, what is it? Inner City?
I have to refer it back to the wider group, but I don't fundamentally see a problem, simply because whenever there is an item of substance, they'd be invited anyway.
So if you want
to formally invite them.
Can we just have item 4, request that the Hagley Park Reference Group consider
Icons.
Inviting Icons, but Inner City, what is it? Inner City West Neighbourhood Association to be a part of the reference group, It's up to them to decide whether, isn't it? So, or authorise the Hagley Park reference group to include them, and then it's up to them to decide. So we've authorised them to include it. Okay. Sorry, there was Dion was next.
Just in page 369 at point 6.8, where required members.
Okay. Yeah.
What?
No,
Okay.
no. I was just sorry.
Where required, members will maintain confidentiality to enable council to exercise its delegated authority. So are these meetings that are going to be happening, are they going to be public excluded, or are they going to be open style meetings where minutes will be published and whatnot? Or will it be a combination of both?
We're working ahead on the basis that, you know, it's all publicly discoverable, but we're required, you know, this is a catch-all. We can't prejudice as council's position in some circumstances. And I guess what we're saying there too is that some of the applicants that might be coming in to discuss some sort of proposal may require confidentiality at that point as well, because they're not ready to go through a consenting process, for example.
Okay, so the point that I wanted to make there was you've got a number of, I mean, it's good that we'll see number 4 happen, but there are a lot of other neighbourhood associations around that have an interest in Hagley Park in the inner city, and it's not just on this side of the city, it's also Riccarton as well, and Addington. And what I'm thinking is that would it be possible to actually publish the agenda items or send an email to those residents associations at the time that these meetings would be happening, and then also send them a copy of the minutes, because I note that it's going to go to Community Development and Housing Committee for information. If it's publicly available, it should be going to those residents associations who are interested and concerned, I suppose. Is it possible to do that?
This is exactly my point that I was getting at in terms of it being front-facing.
That's what I mean, and I'm just trying to see if this is possible, because the point at 6.8 concerns me that members will maintain confidentiality.
No, when required.
Yeah, no, but I'm just wondering if these will be front-facing meetings or
No,
they'll be public
there
excluded.
will be elements where they're not. There'll be shared information about resource consent applications before they even go live.
Absolutely, and I understand
that. They have to keep things confidential. In that regard, but there will be obviously elements where it won't. But I think a newsletter, a front-facing organisation that's accessible through our pages, I think it's a good idea. The idea is for this to be inclusive and engaging. It's the complete opposite of the, you know, sort of the negative approach. It's a positive approach.
Yeah.
So that's what we want it to be.
Yes.
But Andrew's taking notes, so I'm sure that's...
I just want to make sure that that's going to happen, that's all.
Yeah. Andrew.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm broadly in agreement with the terms of reference, but I think there's some tidying up that we could do. These terms of reference are a perfect snapshot of the situation we're in at the moment. But rather than saying the name of the community board, could we not just say a community board representative or a community board member from the community board area which contains Hagley Park? And when we're detailing the chair of the appropriate committee, could we not just say the chair or deputy chair of the committee which has Hagley Park within its terms of reference, to avoid further work needing to be done to update these terms of reference in future councils or situations where those arrangements are changed? And my other thought on that was, for the sake of continuity, we've got a 2-year refresh at the moment. Would it not make sense, as we do with the reserve management committees, to align them with the council triennium so that the committee was refreshed, given that there are elected members on there at the beginning of each new council term? Just a thought. Had any of those things been considered?
Yeah, timeframes had been considered, and really it was around, it's a big commitment for people. You know, there's a lot goes on in Hagley Park, and this is all voluntary. And so there was quite a bit of discussion at the last meeting around what is the appropriate term. And I guess that this is where we settled, and that was a collective agreement with essentially the core members of that group, that a 2-year discussion and refresh was appropriate.
Yeah, no, that's all good. As long as it was considered, if that was the outcome, then that's great.
It was essentially more about their volunteer memberships than council's systems.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fine. But if there's agreement just to picking up those changes to the terms of reference, I think that would be good.
Yep. Phil and then Pauline.
Thank you, Andrew. Could you just remind me, because my recollection is that the terms of reference are around Hagley Park per se, not the areas adjacent to it or the streets adjacent to it. That's the first question. What to that, as a second part to that, Andrew, is clearly there's been a lot of discussion about the different neighbourhood groups, and I've got some concern that if we name one, that in fact we perhaps should, as Dion referred to, Councillor Swiggs, that perhaps to be inclusive, we should name them all. I'm just sort of wondering what your opinion about that is. It's been well discussed by the group, but I just wonder at this stage, to be inclusive, if in perhaps we should say that the surrounding neighbourhood associations to be inclusive. I'm just wondering about your thought on that.
Sure. Well, I guess my thoughts on the wider groups are, we can certainly invite them. We can't, we can't make them join. There is a risk, and this has been discussed at that meeting, that it gets a bit unwieldy. And of course, the group is there to support people with initiatives, and that might include council on improvements or activities associated to Hagley Parks. In that sense, I guess the wider it is, the better. Some groups have also suggested that they don't necessarily want to go into that environment and be, fully open, because they might want to oppose some of those initiatives. So, all of as you'll probably recall, a lot of this has been discussed and debated, quite extensively, and this is where it is now, is where that group settled. I know I haven't given you a yes or no, but it's how big does the group get before it becomes ineffective? Remembering that its purpose is to provide advice to the committee and then on to council, not to make any decisions.
But it's the sounding board. I like the phrase, I really do. Pauline and then Tim.
I was following on from that. So would you consider Hagley Park as a metropolitan?
Hagley Park is a metropolitan facilities in our policy.
So then my point is that if one residents' association on one side was invited to partake, surely we should cast that net perhaps across the whole city to be fair.
Well, I don't know that it's a question of fairness. It's a question of contribution. But I mean, that's the political. That is the political debate. It's not really for a staff member.
The point is it a metropolitan facility?
We're asking questions
that's the
of
question.
staff, and it is a metropolitan facility.
It is a metropolitan facility.
Right, Tim.
Thank you. I guess the term sounding board is a really good one, because the purpose of this committee is to over concerns with regards to Hagley Park, yes?
Correct.
And its balance and management and that type of thing. So with events, there are a huge amount that event organisers do to contact the neighbours with regards to the events coming up with sound and effects on traffic, etc. So the true purpose of this technically is those interest groups using the park, or is it the wider community? Because I've had noise complaints from New Brighton to the airport, believe it or not, airport. So I totally understand the concern people have with regards to residents groups, but there are certain people that will complain about everything. So that's not the purpose of the group. The purpose, I believe, or I understood, was trying to get a balance and the protection of the park. Is that correct?
Yeah.
The purpose of the group is essentially that sounding board, so that as I guess everyone is fully aware, if anything's going to happen at all in Hagley Park, it's going to raise questions for many members of the public and many groups. And so the purpose of the group was to give them a forum where those concerns can be discussed. I think the group's already realised that they're not going to agree on everything, and it's to enable staff to then present in a more proactive manner the viewpoints of the community when initiatives associated with Hagley Park come up. The group is not going to try to resolve issues that may arise out of hosting events or anything like that. It's a proactive, not a reactive forum.
Yep. Sarah? Yeah. All right. Well, I shall open it up for debate then. Yanni?
I think we need to just have a really good think about things that are metropolitan and what that means, because things that are metropolitan have an impact on a local area way more than other people in the city. And so whether it's QE2, which is definitely metropolitan, but you know, it's got huge working with the local community to come up with what's done there, which I welcome and support. You take places like the Groins, which are metropolitan, regional parks. These are all metropolitan assets, and yet the local communities are encouraged to be involved. So, you know, I think the strength of this group, and, you know, I really welcome this. I think this is long overdue. The idea that we have a much more collaborative relationship with people that are impacted by what happens in Hagley Park is a really positive thing. So that, you know, often as a local council representing that area, you get the complaints, and a lot of those complaints do come from people that live quite close to when events are on. But what they don't see is all the work that goes in from the event organisers to try and mitigate some of the problems. And so the idea of working together, I think, just makes so much sense. Sharing information, there will be gaps that come up from time to time, and getting that local feedback as to what's worked well, what hasn't worked well, is really important. So, you know, I don't think we should be worried that because it's a metropolitan asset that we're involving a local group. In fact, I think it should be the opposite. We want the metropolitan asset to work really well. Part of doing that is to have the local people that live in the closest proximity on board with what's happening, so that we minimise the potential for disagreements or conflict. And so that's why I was really supportive of the local residents associations in this area being involved. Now, I appreciate they might not want to be, and that's fine. I think that's a call that they could make, but I think we should certainly extend the invitation. I have to say, I think in the past they have actually worked collaboratively really well with council. Victoria Square, I think, was a really good example. So, you know, I think there is, the Botanic Gardens spatial plan as well. So when they got the opportunity to work with us, I think we've seen nothing but positive results rather than negative. So that's why I'm really supportive of this and supportive of that amendment.
Tim?
Thank you. Look, I'm really pleased that 6.8 is in there, so I think that some of these groups work getting that forward information and the issues that they see some organisers going through would be really good as a heads up. I think the confidentiality is really clever and really important, because obviously there's, it won't be a surprise to them, but there's a wee bit of trickery in the events game, so you always want to keep ahead, so that's always confidential. It was mentioned, you know, we go through a lot, or I say we, I haven't done it for a while, the information that goes out to the local communities around Hagley Park, you know, hand delivering information with regards to what's been agreed to affected areas by council as the owner of the asset, to hand deliver to properties the traffic changes and the times and the noise and the possible issues. It's a huge amount of work, and so the information that goes out from those organisers is a huge amount. So those community residents groups actually get a lot of information. I think that one of the reasons that this was brought up, this group, was the concern of overuse of Hagley Park. And I think we have a time now with the one of the areas classed as the red zone, which is around the Barbados, Fitzgerald, Kilmore, that Avon Loop, to maybe take some pressure off Hagley Park with a second central city park, because everybody wants to do something in the central city. I think that is something that we should kind of look at as a council and councillors to see if there's some way we can take the pressure off. But I really think this is a great document, and it's a really good way forward. There will be, I'm sure, teething issues, but that's the same with everything. But I think this is absolutely outstanding, and thank you very much for the work, Andrew, and the committee as well.
Thank you. I've got Andrew, Sarah, Phil. Glenn. Well, I mean, Phil, you're going to wrap up because you're the final one, and I want to say a couple of things as well. So, Andrew?
I'm hugely supportive of this. I think it's a big move in the right direction. I realise that this has taken some time to put together, but I think it's important that we get this right rather than perhaps rushing into it and doing it sooner. If it took this time to get it right, I was certainly involved in some of the early discussions about this as the chair of the relevant committee at that time. I also think it's right that we acknowledge the people who will be sitting on this body. Clearly, as has been pointed out, it's a voluntary role, and I think we're very fortunate to have people in the city who are willing to give of their time so that we get the best outcomes for Hagley Park, and totally appreciate that. I would just make the point, we've got Resolution 3 there, noting the correction of the Community Board name Linwood Central Heathcote. If we pick up those suggestions that I made earlier in my question, Resolution 3 then in fact becomes redundant, because we wouldn't be naming the Community Board, we would just be picking up the Community Board with Hagley Park in its geographic area.
Sarah?
Thank you. I'm really pleased to see the inclusion of number 4 here, to invite the Inner City West Neighbourhood Association to be part of the group. While ideally, you know, as Pauline said, we'd have more residents groups involved from around the city, or maybe around the other sections of the park, I also agree with the committee chair that having too many groups would be unwieldy. And so having one residents group, this one in particular, who have a long history of being positively involved with interaction with the park, as part of the sounding board, I think is a really good way to ensure resident representation around the table around what is such an important metropolitan asset. Thanks.
Very good. Glenn?
Yes, happy to support this, including number 4. Although number 4, I note the acting chair of Icons already has, by virtue of the civic trust group, a place at the table. So I think this happens because we have a small city. But yeah, I'm pretty relaxed about this, and yeah, let's keep it going.
Aaron?
This might be a little premature, but dare we say, is this hands-on, Hagley?
Very good. Well, I'll just say a couple of words and then I'll hand over to Phil to wrap up. I'm also very pleased to see this happening. I think I recall Hands Off Hagley coming to the council, making submissions, and I recall us having a very good conversation with them about, you know, their desire to contribute to the preservation and, you know, ongoing, the ongoing preservation of Hagley Park for the good of the people of Christchurch, and it certainly does deliver that. And that the phrase "hands off Hagley" was almost a barrier to what they were trying to achieve, and they are going to be very much a part of the reference group, and I know that we all really wanted to send the message that we want to do this together. So I'm extremely pleased. I'd like to congratulate the committee for getting this through and coming up with these terms of reference. I think that it is important to have the neighbourhood association that is the most closely associated with Hagley Park, and I think Yanni raised some very good points about how they've got involved in the process around the district plan, and it specifically referencing Hagley Park. So I think that's ideal in that regard. So, but I do agree with Andrew that the size has got to be kept manageable, and so that it actually can be the sounding board that it's being established to be. So congratulations to the team for getting it together, and I'll hand over to Phil to wrap up the debate. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Leanne and councillors, and again to Andrew. Like, turning things around has taken some time, and I think though it's moving from where, you know, the history hasn't always been easy, and then there've been some good decisions made to actually ensure that the relevant groups are involved and engaged and work with their council. And so I think, you know, collaborating together, that word rolls easily off the tongue, but in fact pulling it together and actually making it work always is harder. And as has been, I think Tim referred to some teething problems. Yep, they'll happen yet. But there's a lot of goodwill among the people attending. I'm very happy that the local neighbourhood association, they're involved, because, and clearly within the terms of reference, the other neighbourhood groups would come along as well if they had a particular interest. So it is an inclusive group. It is overall representative, and I've got every confidence that in fact this group will work very well in the future.
That's great. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrew.